So what did we see last time? We saw that memale means that there are levels. And the way that we learn levels in the person, why we call it komat adam, that there is, meaning that Chazal use this phrase, that there's like an image or a tzelem of a person to describe memale, to describe the light that descends in a line and fills all worlds, is because in the person himself, when the neshama comes into the body, we see that the levels of pleasure, meaning the levels of being, of obtaining pleasure from something, depend on how close they are to the source of the neshama. So that stuff that's in the mind itself, and even in the depth of the mind, which we call bittul, which is like an ability of a person to nullify himself, that's the greatest pleasure. And as the neshama expands, and it fills the body, and it gets to even the ends, so cutting nails is some pleasure, but it's very, very light. It's very subtle. And the greatest type of pleasure that we have is the closer it is to the source. And the source is in the mind. That's where the neshama starts from, and then it fills the body. That's the mashal. That's how a person experiences his life. And we talked a little bit about, this Maichidish, I haven't seen it written, but it seems to me very clear that this is how it works, that when we say that we have free will, we're talking about the will. We're not talking about actions. We don't have free action.
Yeah. Okay.
Remember that?
Well, I remember the shirim of
Eliyahu
Levi in the last few shirim, which you didn't explain Bechira. I mean, it's overlapped a little bit. So like we touched on
where
it a
was
little
this?
Bit in Tvarta Nefesh.
Oh, I didn't know he teaches there.
Eliyahu Levi. Yeah.
Not Eliyahu Sayag. No, Levi.
Yeah, Levi.
Yeah. Okay.
He leaves before you get there.
Oh, okay.
The changing of the guards.
Yeah.
So the idea is that where we have the freedom, and that's why apparently it causes us the deepest type of pleasure, is only in the mind itself. And whether or not it will expand
in the
out.
mind we have freedom, not within action, you're saying?
Right. The actions already that Hashem has to give us. What?
You're saying that the actions are driven by ta'anur?
No, I'm saying that the closer you are to the source, there's more pleasure.
Okay.
And it's so much so that a person could derive incredible pleasure from just being a mind, like what's called a brain in a vat. That's what they used to call it in philosophy. Without even having the extension of actually doing anything. So there's this whole thing, there's all kinds of biofeedback and stuff like that that's done today, that we convince the brain that it did the action, and it gets the same amount of pleasure.
Yeah.
It doesn't need the extension out even, because it's all happening inside the mind itself. And that's an astounding thing, because it's saying that really you only have bchira, you only have choice over what you want to do, but you can't actually do it unless Hashem unless Hashem connects it with an action. Meaning that the moment that it comes out, uses the neural system, the nervous system that comes out of the mind, so there we're already talking about some extension of the mind. It's not the mind itself. And that depends on whether Hashem will let you do it or not. It could be that you had the best intent in the world. When it comes to a good act, Hashem gives you the sachar as if you did it, but whether or not you'll be able to do it or not is up to Him. He decides. So that, by extension, that also means that the main place where you do things is inside the mind. And whether it extends out or not is not so critical. Of course, it is critical because people want to feel that they did something, but we could say that that's really the ego's extension, that the ego wants to feel that I actually did something.
That's also the Tanya these days. I mean, tachlis, that is, for whatever reason, what matters. I mean, that whole story around the person's inner experience.
It matters.
For whatever reason, that's not the goal.
Right, it's not the goal. Meaning, Hashem wants you to do acts. He wants you to do acts.
Right.
But the sachar you get for, like, it's the thought itself. That's the only place where you really have the free will. And afterwards, it's whether Hashem decides whether you'll do it or not. Of course, it has to be it would be like saying that if you're a nus, the person doesn't have a hand, he can't put the tefillin on, but he can do the thought as if he's putting it on.
That women can put on Rabbeinu Tam.
Okay?
Either kavanah.
I thought I just came back from teaching them Likutei Moharan. So we learned the first Torah that Reb Natan heard from Reb Nachman, which was Torah Mem Daled, and it's about Mechiat Kaf.
Okay.
It's a tremendous Torah. It's beautiful to purify the air. It's an air purifier.
Okay.
It makes the air around you the air of Eretz Yisrael.
It's
beautiful. It's the first thing you heard.
Every time before Megillah reading, he makes a petition to the audience. He says, please, instead of like whatever, make me
Clap your hands.
Clap your hands.
Who says this? So they asked me, so do you do this too? I said, no, I'm a Lubavitcher. So what do you do? I said, I think it.
That's very cute.
Because for me, there is no real difference whether I think, in fact, if I do it, to me it's like too magical. So I don't want magic. I know he does. He also, I don't think, means that, but he says for simple people, he says just say clap your hands. I'm also a simple person, but I learned what he said. So for me, it sticks to me really strong, the whole teaching. And so whenever I think about it, like why you should set a place where you daven, and what it means to purify the air around you, how you do this with the sound of your voice also, all these things. So I think in the end it affects me much more than if I would stand and draw attention by clapping. I don't like drawing the attention. And even when I do something, I like to do it like in a way that nobody sees. I don't want to be conspicuous. I feel uncomfortable with it. So whether it's my ego, whatever it is, but extending that way, I'm not crazy about it. And I feel like it's better to think it. But in any case.
Yeah, okay.
So all this is the Memale. Now he brings a big chiddush. And this is actually a chiddush that's repeated many, many times in Torah Or and in Likutei Torah by his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. And he says, V'zeu shamur azan, so we're about 20 lines from the bottom. You see it? Oh, you don't see it. V'zeu shamur azan b'yud nivra olam haba. So the world to come was created with a yud. The hay is like the whole shiur koma, is like how everything extends down. That's the memale. And the olam haba is the soviv. So this is one of the main analyses that the Alter Rebbe did for what do you mean when you say olam haza and olam haba. Now olam haza is memale, and olam haba is the revelation of the soviv. That's really what it means. And so the yud, when you say that the olam haba is created with a yud, he says, what do you mean? והעניין כי חוכמה היא ראשית ההשתלשלות. כי דכתיב ראשית חוכמה, כן, יראת השם, והתלבשות או אינסוף באביה הוא על ידי החוכמה. So this is a big deal for him. He says, from the Maggid I heard this, and this is a very important thing, that if the light of the infinite is going to dwell anywhere, it has to come through Chokhmah. Right. Why? What's so special about Chokhmah? Because it starts as a point. Because Yud is the letter of Chokhmah, it's a tzimtzum. Why do you need this tzimtzum? There's two meanings to tzimtzum. Tzimtzum could mean, we talked about this, it could either mean that istalkut, that something's missing now, or it could mean a concentration.
Okay.
Those are the two meanings. Yeah. But if it's a tzimtzum, so really what we're gaining from it is what we call a dilug, is a skipping. Yeah. Meaning that the sovev can reveal itself if there's a tzimtzum before, meaning if there's a power of bittul, an ayin, so the sovev can reveal itself. Why? Because if it's a yesh, the sovev can't, because it'll destroy it. Because any kind of yesh can't contain the infinite. The sovev is infinite. The memala is finite. So if all you have is bina, and bina is very much yesh, it's very much a vessel, and you try to put this up, you try to touch the infinite with it, it immediately cancels out. You can't do it. But with chokhmah, which is a feeling of nullification, you become a point, and that point, even though it almost doesn't make sense, but it's like the skip can happen. the Sovev can suddenly appear in the Mamali. So this has a million ramifications, this concept, that the top of the Kav is a point. And we talked about this when we were learning now Emunah and Bitachon, that the top of the Kav is the hardest part to get out, because what you're doing is somehow, it has to be a tremendous amount of bittul there, and you have to fight to bring it down, and to cause the skip to happen. Basically what you're doing is you're causing like a discharge from the Sovev, if I would use some kind of analogy. It's like lightning a strike. That's what it's described as. That somehow the skies bring down a lightning. And you understand that the lightning is infinitely thin. It's like this incredible thing. How does this exactly happen? Why does the incredible energy that's harbored right now in the clouds suddenly discharge and hit the earth? But that's exactly that there's a point of bittul there. And that point of bittul pulls it down somehow.
The bittul in the earth.
The earth, yeah, the bittul is in the earth.
Like
Right. The clouds are like the Sovev, and they have all this energy. And the lightning strike, which is almost like nothing, right, is because there's a point of bittul below.
And the process is a dilog that.
Right, and it's a skip because nothing remains. It's all gone once it discharges, and we also don't know how it happens. So the first analogy that comes to mind, apart from nature, is in the human mind. A lot of Chassidus is about how do we reveal the latent talents that we have. Actually, talent and latent is, I think, the same letters. Somebody has to check that. But so we have a lot of latent talents, and we want them to come down. So the explanation is in Chassidus that the latent talents, they're the Reisha de Ein and Reisha de Arich, meaning they're the Ta'anug and Ratzon inside the Keter, in the Sovev, and for them to come down, they have to hit our Chokhmah. So in the Kabbalah of the Arizal, it's called Chokhmah Stima versus Chokhmah Niglit. They have to somehow has to make that skip. How do you make that skip? You have to have bittul. I mean, you have to come into a place where you clean yourself out completely. And like Rav Yitzchak talks about this all the time. That he said this in the last class, I think, or 2 classes ago. And Munavi Bitachon, he said that since the time I know I became conscious of what I'm doing, this was my staple of how to learn. That after I've learned, I clean myself out completely, and then it strikes me, and then I get this chidush of what this all means. And he says that, and he does it very quickly now. You can see he does it in seconds now. Like he learns it really seriously, but then he cleans it out, and then something from above comes and hits him, and that's inspiration for him. That's creativity. It's a very important thing. He's tried to teach it so many times. I've heard so many classes about it. There was a guy called Aryeh Nechaisi in Alav Shalom in New York, and that was his most important topic. He wanted the Rav to explain how he's so creative. So the Rav tried many, many times to explain it. Like, what do I do? And he always came back to this point that in the end, you have to be in bittul. And when you're in bittul, suddenly something comes down. Like, it draws it down. So that's what he's saying here. That for the Or Ein Sof to come down into Abia, hu al yedei Chokhmah, for it to come down into the revealed world, into the worlds that we're working with, in our conscious environment, you have to have bittul, you have to have chokhmah. Moshe Katuv b'Likutei Amarim, al pasuk kulam b'chokhmah asita. That even when Hashem wanted to create the world, He had to do it with chokhmah. What does it mean He has to do it with chokhmah? He has to have some kind of ayin there. He has to have some kind of siluk. V'hinei mechokhmah ulamata b'chinat ishtalshalut ha'olamot. And from then on, it becomes a memale. It's all ishtalshalus. The Shabbos I saw in the Rebbe something very interesting. For years I didn't know I should have known already, but now what the Rebbe would have said. But I've always been troubled by what would Chassidus say about Rav Kook's shita in davening. He's not the first one to say it, but he's the one that is most quoted today. The davening is about changing the person, and not about changing Hashem. Rambam says something like that. He made it very popular, this opinion. So I saw that in Tafshin Kafei, because I'm learning Tafshin Kafei, because it's the same year as now, it's the same Kviyut, everything's the same. So that was the year that the Rebbe's mother passed away. And during the Shiva, actually this was before the Shiva, because it was on Vav Tishrei. So the funeral wasn't, and Vav Tishrei that year was Friday. And then they were going to have the Levaya on Sunday. So he was an Onan for a long time, for a whole Shabbos. And so a lot of people came to him on Friday already to be with him. And so there's a lot of very interesting discussions going on. And one of them, somehow they got to this, of how does davening affect? And because they talked about Chiyas Mesim. And so he asked the question, why do we need, why does the Gemara ask Tchiyat Metim in Torah Minayin? From where do we know there's Chiyas Mesim in the Torah? He says, why would you need to have a source? You don't need a source. Why? Because it's a svara. It's an easy svara. If somebody wasn't alive, came to be alive, so all the more so somebody was already once alive, of course. Okay. And that's Rabbi Akiva's answer. It's very, very strong. So it says, so why still does the Gemara say? So it says, because there's two inyan on the svara is like ishtalshulos. And if the Torah says something, that's above ishtalshulos. And he said, what's an example of this? And then he brought this example. He said, if you say that by davening I change myself, that's svara. It's very strong. It's very true. But that it's a mitzvah to daven, okay, that would be true even if the Torah wouldn't say anything. The Torah doesn't have to tell you to daven. Every person understands. If I change myself, different shefa will come down. Okay. But for me to do more than that, and we talked about it, like to do a chana for the tefillah, the tefillah itself as a mitzvah from Hashem, that's already to go above ishtalshulos. Yeah. So whenever you say ishtalshulos and above ishtalshulos, it's like saying everything in memale, which is according to human logic and to understanding and svara, and then above it is to do bittul, some kind of bittul, and to say the Torah tells me to do it. So even if I have a svara, I put the svara aside. And now I want to do bittul in order to get to the soviv, to get to something that's beyond. And then he explained that when it comes to Tchiyas HaMesim, we don't just want the side of Tchiyas HaMesim that's according to Svara. We also want the Ein Sof to appear, meaning, because otherwise it'll be like the Rambam. This he didn't say exactly, but that's what came to me from what I learned. That otherwise we'll get like the Rambam, that there's going to be Tchiyas HaMesim, but then you die again. But for it to be nitzchi, for it to be eternal life afterwards, you have to tap into the Soviv. And in order to tap into the Soviv, it has to be from the Torah. You can't just do it from Svara. So there was So there's a lot of things like this that we have ishtalshelus, the memale of the world, but when we come to a state of bittul, we can gain from the infinite that's above, like the sky above me.
Are there two dimensions of Torah? Like, I'm feeling confused in the learning that I'm doing recently, like where the Torah sort of fits into the scheme of everything. And this is a question we can have afterwards potentially. But is it shayachus? I mean, what you're saying is obviously Torah. What you're saying is reflecting the Torah as a part of the essence. Right? Hashem Torah. But this also seems to be references to Torah where Torah is like lines up somehow with Seder Shtashalit as well.
It has to also fit. It can't be completely.
I mean, the Torah is shayach. The Torah.
It's like Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov.
The world, and it's like shayach to the Metzius.
Because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov learned from nature what to do. So it's not contrary. Like there's this whole shita, especially Rav Aviner, he's the one who, at least in my world, he's the one who talked the most about it, about natural Yiddishkeit. And by natural Yiddishkeit, what he means is that the mitzvahs are natural to you. So go look for how to educate a child, how to do chinuch in a way that's natural for them. Don't do Kabbalah soul. It should be natural. But in Chabad, everything is Kabbalah soul. So what do you do with the two? Said it, because there's both. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they understood it naturally. They understood it as mitzvahs that are in nature. Afterwards, when we received the Torah from above, kafalem hal kegigit, what was that for? It's explained in Chassidus. That's to give us the sense of Kabbalah soul. Hashem didn't do it in order to tell us either you accept it or you die. Rather, the whole exercise was to feel that this is Kabbalah soul, that you have to do it. He wasn't really going to kill you, but was trying to impress on you, on your psyche, that doing it with Kabbalah soul because I have to is a virtue in and of itself.
Yeah.
So in that sense, he's giving me the sovev of it. How do I connect both things together? So that's Rabbi Isaac of Homel, and he heard this from the Alter Rebbe, and he calls this Yiddish natur. He says, on the one hand, it's all the Kabbalah soul, but my Kabbalah soul becomes my second nature. So on the one hand, I'm doing it out of Kabbalah soul. On the other hand, I'm doing it second nature. The Rebbe has other answers to it. We just learned the Sikha last week, that the Rebbe says the moment that you say you want Kabbalah soul, it has the same effect. You don't have to make it into your nature, you just have to want it. The moment you say, I want Kabbalah soul. Because, why? So the example that came to me was, well, I have to go to work. Let's say I have a job I really hate. I don't want to go there. So every day that I go there, it's a Kabbalah soul, and it's very difficult, and I don't do very much because I'm constantly fighting myself to do it. But what if I convince myself 100% that I want to do something that is not my nature to do? I convince it because it's very high. It's a big thing. It could become that I suddenly flow in it very naturally and succeed in doing a lot of things that otherwise I would be prevented. I would stop myself from all my pushing against it.
I once did one of the worst jobs in the world, but I convinced myself that it was one of the best jobs in the world, until somebody pointed out to me that it was actually really one of the worst jobs in the world. And then it became apparent to me that it was one of the worst jobs in the world, and then I couldn't do it anymore. But for a year I did it.
Say that.
It's delicate.
Huh?
It's delicate.
So every day I convinced myself that this was the best,
Yeah, you have to
This was
reconvince
the-
yourself.
even though it was the worst.
Until it becomes second nature to convince yourself.
That sounds a little bit like the chiddush you mentioned the other day about that moment of kavanah before the mitzvah. The mitzvah is the mitzvah, but then you have this space, so to speak, for introducing an element of the mitzvah.
Right. That's exactly it. והנה מחוכמה ולמטה הוא בחינת השתלשלות העולמות, אבל החוכמה עצמה מאין תימצא. But Chokhmah itself is almost touching the Sovev, so it's coming out of the Ayin. It has an aspect of Ayin to it. שלא כדרך הדרגת ההשתלשלות. And so it's not like השתלשלות, it's not like ממלא. כי אור אין סוף ברוך הוא מתנשא רבבות מדרגות אין קץ למעלה מבחינת חוכמה אלה. Because the infinite light is infinitely higher than Chokhmah. וכידוע בפירוש המאמר דלאו מכל עינון מידות אי הוא כלל, as we say in the Patach Eliyahu, that he, meaning his essence, is nothing like the measures, the midos, the spheros that come down, שעצמות אור אינסוף ברוך הוא פשוט בתכלית הפשיטות ואינו מגדר ואינו מגדר או אינו מגדר בחינת 10 ספירות חוכמה ובינה כלל, כמו שכתוב במקום אחר. And we include Chokhmah there, and we say that Or Ein Sof is infinitely higher than even Chokhmah, but still, ולזאת להיות התאהבות בחינת חוכמה הוא על ידי צמצום גדול ועצום, וזהו שכתוב מאין תימצא. שהתהוותה בבחינת דילוג המדרגה, בחינת יש מאין, ולא בחינת השתלשלות הילה ועלול, יש מיש. So that's the secret of Chokhmah. Chokhmah becomes where the paradox happens. Then on the one hand, it's the beginning of Ishtalshlus. On the other hand, because it's the beginning, it also has a gap above it to the Sovev, to the infinite. And so when that gap can be filled, that's exactly making it so that the Ein Sof can suddenly appear within the Sof. Okay. She'ilu ayaken, if it was yesh miyesh, if it was ilah ve'alul, לא היה יכול להיות התהוות בחינת חוכמה, מאחר שרואי יתברך פשוט בתכלית, כמו שהוא פשוט, ואינו אומר בחינת חוכמה, שהיא מהות מוגבל ונגדר. חוכמה means that there's some svara here, there's some seichel here. So if Chokhmah wasn't Reshit Akav, it's called the Reshit, the beginning, Reshit Chokhmah, that's what the pasuk that he mentioned, Reshit Chokhmah, Yirat Hashem, or Reshit Chokhmah, other things. If it wasn't the Rashid, it wouldn't be able to come into existence at all, because otherwise it would just remain Ein Sof, and there would be no svara. There's no ability to have logic. There's no ability to have understanding when it comes to the Ein Sof. There, the human mind or whatever is limited cannot grasp anything. So the Chokhmah has to have some kind of gap above it, and it's pulling down the Ein Sof into its limited vessels.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of things that come out of this. We talked about this in Emunah B'Tachon, I think. That the Rebbe made a big deal out of it, but the first place I've seen it written is in the Rebbe Moarash. And he calls it Mitziuti Ma'atzmuti. That my being is from myself. Because the very top of me is Chokhmah. And
Who's the me here?
me is me. Every person, what does he feel? No person knows where he came from. Meaning, even though I have pictures of me as a baby, and even though my parents tell me I came from them, nobody feels that they came from their parents.
Okay.
So that's the way to explain this, says the Rebbe Moarash, and the Rebbe uses it much more strongly, that we have an aspect to us that doesn't know where it comes from. So there must have been a skip.
Yeah.
Because we can't tell. As far back as I go, I don't remember how I came out of my parents.
That's very funny, and yet we believe with absolute certainty that we came from our parents.
What do you mean?
You don't just believe,
You know it.
you know.
Yeah, you know. Okay.
But you can't feel it. You can't
feel
experience
it.
it.
Somehow, it's such an obvious knowing. Yeah, because you.
So that's
So we
what,
observe it.
No,
The
it's not
next
reason.
generation.
right? We see our own children. We see how they
Otherwise, we
came
have
from
to
us.
believe it.
Huh?
We observe it. It's just not our own story.
So this is not the place to get into this.
Okay, we said.
There's what is the book of wisdom? Still, I have to say something like that. I saw that this Shabbos and it just hit me. What's the book of wisdom?
The chakras back.
So we usually say it's Sifrei Emet, Yov, Mishlei, Tehillim. So Mishlei is the book of wisdom, but there's higher than Mishlei. It just wasn't included. What's that? It's called Sefer Ben Sira. So Chazal were very ambivalent about it. So on the one hand, there's many true things here. On the other hand, there's some stuff that we don't know what to do with. Who was Ben Sira? Where did he come from? So he's considered to be a son of Yirmiyahu. He was born from Yirmiyahu, but Yirmiyahu didn't beget him directly. How was he born? So it says the same story as Shmuel. Shmuel the Amora, the sage of the Talmud, he says, I can impregnate a woman just by being in a bathtub before. Huh? What are you talking about? What is he saying? He's saying that there has to be a skip. Right? Normally what we say is there has to be actual physical contact.
Fits in with this term.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's saying. There has to be some kind of physical contact. And we'll get to it later because there we'll talk about couplehood. There has to be physical contact. And if there's no physical contact, you can't say that the chokhmah affected the bina. You can't say something above affected something below. There has to be some kind of physical contact. But what is he saying here? He's saying that in places where there's a skip, there's actually more of the infinite comes down than when there's no skip. Meaning, if there's contact, it's actually more limited because it's yesh miyesh. But if I'm able to do something like a skip, meaning he went into the bathtub a day earlier, and she went into the bathtub the day after, they're not talking about a physical conception. It's not talking about something physical. They're talking about wisdom. They're talking about, it's a mashal for something. Yeah, I don't believe at all that they're talking about something physical. There's almost no question they're not talking about something physical. It's trying to give a mashal. And the mashal is trying to say that if there's a skip, the wisdom, the father that goes, Abba is chokhmah. So the father that affects is much stronger than if there's direct contact. And so it says, who learned by Yirmiyahu? It's very interesting. It's well known. This was known in the ancient books. Up to until the end of the 19th century, it was common knowledge that Plato learned from Yirmiyahu. It was common knowledge all over the world. Everybody knew this. Then they came and they said it can't be, the years don't fit, it's this, it's that. It can't be. Where would they have met? According to the old books, they would have met in Egypt. Because Yirmiyahu told them to stay in Eretz Yisrael, the ones who were left after Gedaliah ben Achikam was killed, was murdered. He told the rest of the Jews that were there, stay in, Hashem says, he prophesied, Hashem says, stay in the country, and even though it will be very difficult, you'll be prosperous and you'll rebuild the country. And they decided that no, they're not going to listen to him, even though they promised they would listen to him, and they went down to Egypt and they took him with them. So he went down to Egypt without consent. He was forced there. And according to the old books, that's where he met Plato. So Plato, what did Plato receive from him? A lot of wisdom. And so this is one of the ways the Chazal say the wisdom that the philosophical wisdom really came as a subset of Torah. And that's why we accept some of the things that Plato said, something that Aristotle said, because in the end it has its roots inside Torah. But what about Ben Sira? My understanding is what they're saying is Ben Sira is much, much higher wisdom than anything Plato or Aristotle had. And really, if you want to go to the roots of all Goyish wisdom, Ben Sira, it's not clear. Was he a Jew? Wasn't he a Jew? It's not clear at all who this person was. But the whole story about him is that he was begotten from a skip from Yirmiyahu, not direct physical contact. It's some kind of ambati, some kind of bath where the mother became impregnated. So they're not saying, I don't think they're saying a physical description. I think they're trying to say that Yirmiyahu's wisdom was passed on to Ben Sira as a yesh mi'ayin, not as a yesh mi'yesh like it was with Greek philosophy. So that's the theory that came to me this Shabbos when it was on him. So there's many examples of this, of the skipping causing much more. Anyway, the Rebbe says that this is a big positive thing for us. The fact that we don't remember where we came from. In Reb Nachman's 7 betlers, the 7 kaptzanim, so when they come to this island, one of the, I think the 4th betler, 5th betler, when they come to this island, there's a great eagle there, and he asks everybody, what do you remember? Which is actually a repetition of what the Baal Shem Tov used to do. They used to ask, what do you remember? How far back do you remember? So the greatest thing to remember back is the ayin. Somebody said, I remember the ayin. Somebody said, I remember the apple tree. Somebody said, I remember the apple itself. Somebody said, I remember the seed inside the apple. These are all images for conception. But somebody said, I remember the ayin. Before there was a tree, before there was anything. When it was rotten, when the seed became rotten in order to grow the new tree.
Okay.
So that was the ayin. So says the Rebbe in that, and this again, this is from the Rebbe Morash, that in this sense we are like Hashem. That's why we understand what Hashem wants. Because Hashem is the only being that truly is not from anything else. But he said he gave us that experience. He gave us that experience, mitziuti me'atzmuti, my being is from myself, so that we could understand him. He said that's what Hashem was looking for. Somebody would understand how he is. So I'm not. I came from my parents. I know that. But my experience, my existential experience is that I came out of nothingness.
Yeah.
And that itself is a great plus that I can now understand how Hashem is.
Yeah, on the other hand, you can also have a situation where you say, I created myself.
Nachon. It can fall down, right, it can be mamash, it can turn into idolatry, self-idolatry. And that's actually where the ego also starts, where a person begins to believe, I created myself, I'm a self-made man. So, even though he knows that it's not true. Okay. Okay. So now we're ולא בחינת השתלשלות אליו עלול ישמיע. שאילו היה כן, if the chokhmah was connected to the סובב as יש מיש, לא היה יכול להיות התהוות בחינת חוכמה. מאחר שאורו יתברך פשוט בתכלית, because the light of the סובב is completely undefined. פשוט means without definition. כמו שהוא פשוט. ואינו מערך בחינת חוכמה. And חוכמה, which is definitions, could not contain it. שהיא מהות מוגבל ונגדר, because it is defined, it is with limits. על כל פנים, לומר כי הוא כוח מיוחד פרטי. כן? So you couldn't say that Chokhmah was something separate from Bina, and you would have this problem all the way down. So somebody has to stop it. And Chokhmah stops it. How? By having a gap. By saying that I'm like created with a gap. So I have definition, but before me there's nothing. There's nothingness. So that's why Chokhmah has the quality of bittul in it. Because to have bittul really means to feel that I'm nothing. My source is nothingness. To feel bittul in life is to feel that source, that my source is in nothingness. It's like, you said, on the one hand, it helps me understand the Shem. On the other hand, it's also a different experience altogether. It's the experience of nullification. It's saying I am nothing because I came from nothing. Right. I can't hold for myself as anything because really, what did I stem from? From nothingness. I'm not a continuation of anything. I have no substance, as it were. ולכן נקראת החוכמה יוד. So that's what's called that the world to come will be created with a yud. עליות התהוותה מאור אינסוף ברוך הוא על ידי צמצום עצום. So the shape of the yud, the form, is a point. So that is supposed to symbolize the contraction, that it's just a point. But it's also that from then and on, there's 10 sfirot. The yud also equals 10. So on the one hand, it's like I'm nothingness. On the other hand, from me and on, suddenly everything appears. עד שמאיר רק כנקודה בעלמא כמו היוד, הדרך משל, ומחוכמה ואילך מתפשט האורה בבחינת השתלשלות הילה ועלול, וזוהי בחינת ממלא כל עלמין. And therefore, ולכן האמור הזה שהעולם הבא נברא ביוד. So if you want to capture anything of the Sovev, that's what Olam Haba means. כן? Olam she'olech ubad, it's always coming down. How are you bringing it down? By experiencing bittul, by having chokhmah. כי כל בחינת תענוגי הנשמות שבגן עדן, וכל ריבוי הבחינות ועליות גבוה מעל גבוה עד שם, הנה מקורם ושורשם בחינת חוכמה כידוע בעניין ונהר יוצא מעדן. So any kind of experience of ta'anug, and ta'anug again is, like we said, it's ascending the levels of understanding, it's ascending the levels of experience, getting more and more. All that is dependent on the person having, first of all, chokhmah, and then it can come down. Obviously here the chokhmah would be above even the ta'anug, above the keter in some way. And the way it's written in the Chumash is v'nahar yotzeh me'eden lashkot et hagan. So the Eden is the Tanugot, v'nahar yotzeh me'eden. So the Nahar is the Bina. It comes out of Eden. Eden is the Chokhmah. It's the Tanug. אמנם הנה עצמות אור אינסוף ברוך הוא למעלה מזה, והחוכמה ראשית ההשתלשלות נקראת יוד, ובטלה בתכלית כטיפה מאוקיינוס ויותר מזה כערך ביטול בעל הגבול ובלתי בעל גבול שאינו נערך כלל, כמו שכתוב beginning of everything we just said. בלקוטי אמרים, ועל זה נאמר בחוכמה עשית, שחוכמה עם העשייה שווים אצלו, כמו שלגבי בלתי בעל גבול שווה אחד עם אלפי אלפים. So the Chokhmah is called Asiya for him, for the Sovev, because the Sovev is infinite and the Chokhmah is already something finite. And when it comes to something infinite and finite, like we explained, whether I travel from the Andromeda galaxy to the Earth or I travel from Andromeda galaxy to the Moon, makes no difference. It's the same distance in the end. Because there's no relationship between, there's no way to compare the infinite to anything finite. והוא הנקרא סובב כל עלמין. And the point is, that's why the Arizal describes it as a surrounding light. Why? Because when you have a circle, the circle implies infinity. So we saw in the class different meanings for that. כי מהיות שאינו מתלבש בעלמין, אבל מכל מקום הוא סובב ומקיף עליהם, וזוהי בחינה השנייה שאור אינסוף ברוך הוא בחיי העולמות, על ידי שאורו יתברך הבלתי בעל גבול ובלתי בעל תכלית, סובב ומקיף עליהם. ואדרבה, באמת זה עיקר החיות. Now he says something that we said before, that the fact that the worlds exist comes out of the Sovev, not out of the Memale. The Memale is the pleasure that you get from the world. But for the world to actually exist, for that you need the Sovev. For that you need the surrounding light. And surrounding light is the actual existence of things. We said that the physical world, or the physical existence, is the great equalizer. Everything is the same here. Everything becomes equal when it comes down to the physical level. מאחר שהוא עיקר בחינת אינסוף, הרי ממנו עיקר קיום הנמצאים, שאילו יסלק שפרו, היו כל הנמצאים כלא היו. והנה ביאור עניין הקפה הזו, איך ומה היא, אין כאן מקומו. How this is done by the sovev, why it's a sovev we already explained, because it equalizes everything. All the physical matter in the world is equal. And so today we have a very good explanation for this. It used to be much more difficult for them to explain it. I don't know how they explained it exactly. They saw it from Akol Eyamin Afal V'Akol Shav El Afal, that in the end everything is dust, and so everything returns to dust. Today, with quantum theory, it's much easier to say this, that in the end everything is just quarks or leptons or whatever it is, and it's all the same. Whether you have a human mind or you have a chunk of rock, in the end it's made up of the same quarks. And in a sense, we always draw these particles as circles. I don't know why we have it in our minds that that's what they are. They're not. But they're more like points. It's very interesting that they're more like the chokhmah in the sense that they're like they fill the gap, or the gap is filled between the soviv and them. But still we have in our mind somehow that they're all particles, they're all round or something in some way. In any case, he says, I'm not going to explain here how the soviv brings everything, allows everything to be in existence. Just understand that life force itself is equal everywhere, and there's also a hierarchy. And this is a big deal because the world has it mamish backwards. There's no other way to say it. It's a famous sikha from the Rebbe, one of the most famous sikhas, I think, that really made it up into the top 10. It was about Purim, the Rabba Shachtel and Rabbi Zera. And so apart from the fact that you have to be very careful to understand when Chazar is giving you a parable when they're saying something that actually happened. Obviously this is a parable. There's no way in the world that Rabba, one of the greatest, holiest people ever in the world, could possibly even lift a finger on somebody, even if it was 1,000,000 times drunk. It doesn't make any sense. It's not shaykh, like at any level. To take that literally is it's like what were you doing up to Masechet Megillah? You didn't see who these people are. You don't understand what kind of people they are. How could you even think that? Okay, so what does a parable mean? That's the question. What do you want to say? He came and he slaughtered him. There's another thing like that in Yuma. Just a few Masechtot earlier. It says that you're allowed to linchor et Am ha'aretz afilu b'Yom Kippurim. That the Talmud Chacham is allowed to kill an Am ha'aretz, a simpleton, even in Yom Kippur. And people take this literally. It's a mashal. So the question is, what does a mashal mean? That's always the question, and the answer has to be very serious. So the Rebbe explained to shecht something, and how does he learn this? He learns it from Chulin. In the Chulin it says, "V'shachat en v'shachat ela umashach." To shecht something is to draw it. So what are you doing? When you shecht something, you draw something back to its source. That's the explanation in Chassidus. It says, any kind of shechting that I do, what I'm doing is I'm bringing something back to its source. I'm bringing it back to where it came from. Okay. So let's start with Rabba and Rabbi Zera. The whole point of drinking on Purim, says the Rebbe, is to bring a person back to his source so that he feels, what does he feel? The soviv. That really, the existence, the plain existence, is not what my mind says, but what my body tells me. The fact that I exist. Okay. All the svaros that I know, all the pleasure that I get from all the Torah that I learned and everything that I learned, and all the even bodily pleasures that I get, they're just interpretations of the mind. That's not pure existence. Pure existence comes from the soviv, like we just said. So what did Rabbah do? Rabbah, who was greater, so he says he's the soviv, and Rav Zera, he's the ira, he's the small one, he's like the mamale. So came Rabbah and he shechted him in the sense that through the drunkenness, he was able to elevate him back to feel the soviv. That's what he did. That's the explanation. So it's a beautiful explanation. It's very deep, and the Rebbe brings a lot of things.
But it was enough.
Okay, but he said, not every year can you do this. So let's not. And also, you gave me already what I needed to see. I saw my source. I saw kula kamei kelo chashiv. I saw how everything before it is like nothing. On the one hand, it makes everything exist. On the other hand, when you achieve that level, you also see how kula kamei, the kula is the memale, what's inside, the mechil, what's inside. Kula means everything that's inside. Everything that's in my mind is like nothing compared to the soda. I saw that. I don't need to see more than that. Now, let's take vegetarianism. What do you do when you shecht an animal? So the Rebbe has in Igros Kodesh in Chelek Aleph, he has two Igros, Kaf Zayin and Ayin Vav, I think. And those two Igros, these are Igros that he wrote before he became the Rebbe. He explained, somebody asked him, I don't know who was, asked him, explain to me this whole thing of shechting. What is this whole thing? So he explained what it means that we bring things back to their source. So what does it mean to bring things back to the source? He says there's three types of animals that we eat. We either eat behemoths, cows, sheep, goats, or we eat poultry, the fowls, or we eat fish. So how does the shechting work? The behemoths, the animals, the domesticated animals, where did they come out of according to the Torah? According to the Torah, they came out of the earth. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim min ha'adama kol chayat Vayitzer Elokim. It's in the first chapter. Vayitzer Elokim min ha'adama et kol behema v'chayat ha'aretz. They came from the earth. Now somebody says, do they need the earth to subsist? Have you ever seen an animal that has to go into the earth like a cow that buries itself once a day? Now I can breathe. Doesn't exist. So what are they doing? You saw this, Igeret? This is such an important Igeret. She says, so we see that on the one hand, their source is in the earth, but they don't need the earth to subsist.
Okay.
So what is that?
Obviously it's very literal because they eat from the earth, but it's...
No, but they don't need the earth itself. You're right. In some way, there's some connection, and they walk on the earth also.
Didn't come from the earth.
And they also walk.
With that as well.
Yeah, and
Even
if you give it,
hydroponically grow their food, whatever. I don't know.
or even if you give them other animals,
Well,
they don't know
which
the
do.
difference.
Okay, yeah.
So, on that account, they're completely disconnected from their source. So he says that's like the animal soul. That's why we call it behema, nefesh behemit. Because the animal soul doesn't know at all where it came from. There's no clue. What does it feel? Mitzvotech, mitzvotech. It feels like it came from myself. Okay. What about poultry, fowl? So in the Torah it says that they were taken from earth and water together. Rakak it's called. Like some kind of mud. Do they need the mud in order to subsist? No, they don't. But they do something that the domesticated animals don't do. They fly in the air.
All right, fine.
They can elevate, but they can't stay there. They have to come down eventually. So he says that's the intellectual soul. The intellectual soul also doesn't know what its source is, but from time to time, the more it learns, it elevates. And it comes closer to understanding that it's shayach to somewhere else. It comes to some kind of understanding, but it can't stay there. Every time it goes up, and that's like most of us. When we learn Torah, or when we're in a davening, we feel something about this that I came from somewhere else, that my source is somewhere. I'm dependent on Hashem. So they're another category. They're the intellectual soul. What about the fish? It says the fish were made from water. But the fish, as opposed to the poultry and to the domesticated animals, they have to be in the water. The moment you take them out of the water, they die. So it says, here's an example of something that not only knows what its source is, but it can't survive without it. So that's the divine soul. It says, and now you see that in shechting, there are three different types of shechting. When it comes to the domesticated animals, according to everybody agrees, it's from Doraita, it's from the Torah that you have to shecht it. Meaning you have to return it. By shechting it, you return it to its source. That's what it does. It returns it to its source. The same way that Rabbah shechting, as it were, Rav Zera was to return him to his source, to show him the Soviv. What's above all is experience. In other words, the animal is experiencing what? That it has no source. And when you shecht it, again, you have to take the Torah's word for it. You're returning it, you're giving it back a connection to its source, where it came from. What about the poultry, the fowl? So there's a machlokas. There's some opinions that it's doraisa, and some opinions that it's not doraisa. It's only the rabbanon that you need to shecht it. Why? Because it's not exactly clear. On the one hand, it doesn't know what its source is, but from time to time it elevates. So it comes to some recognition of its source. The fish, you don't need to do anything. They don't need to be returned to their source. The moment that you take them out of their source, that's it. They live. It's like the divine soul. The Rebbe adds to that in the second Igeres. He adds something more. He says, but there is a big difference between shechting chulin and shechting kotchin. In chulin, how do you shecht? You have to shecht from in front, from the trachea. Simanim, you have to take out the front of the animal. And the fowl, same thing. Except in the animal there's two simanim, it's wider. And in the fowl there's only one. Because they need less, as it were. They need to be returned less to their source. But he says, but when you bring it into the Mikdash, when you bring it into the temple, and you shech there, it's a completely different thing. How do you shecht in the Mikdash? An animal, you shecht the same way. But a fowl, poultry, you shecht from behind, from the olive. And it's done by the Kohen himself. So he starts from behind and then he comes in front. He says, what is that? What does that indicate? So he says, for the animal soul and for the intellectual soul, when you're not in the Mikdash, if you're not in Torah or in davening, for the animal soul always needs the olive. The olive represents Kabbalah soul. That's the source. Yeah. That's the soviv. Meaning, if there's a part of my body that's soviv, it's the back side of my body. The front side of my body is the mamale. Yeah. That's like the simple idea. In the front part, you see my experiences. You see how I feel. You see all my midos. They come out in front. The back side is the soviv. It represents the soviv. So when it's chulin, when it's not in the Mikdash, meaning the animal always needs Kabbalah soul. The nefesh behemoth always needs Kabbalah soul. You can never shecht it from behind. You always have to leave it intact. And in fact, if it's not intact, it's automatically a sign that it's treif. Okay, and if there's any kind of problem with the backside of the animal, in a domesticated animal, we assume it's treif. We don't shecht it. But with poultry, it depends. It says with the intellectual soul, it depends. If it's in chulin, so it also needs its backside. The intellect, if you're just in university or you're studying other things, or maybe even ben sira, whatever it is, you have to have your backside intact. You have to have your sovev intact. You have to have Kabbalah soul, and then you'll live and act like a yid, knowing your source. But when you come into the Mikdash, meaning you're either learning or davening, says you can shecht from the Kabbalah soul. It's actually a higher level. It's as if you're aware of your soviv. And so there's no problem of shechting there. And not only that, is there no problem. That's how you actually do it. You start from there. You start from that point to elevate the person from the very Kabbalah soul that he has. Anyway, okay. So it's very beautiful Igeres. Really recommend learning it.
Igeres, what? Do you know?
So it's Kaf Zayin and Ayin Vav, I think.